What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the next episode of my summer deep dive series where we are going team by team, taking an in-depth look, breaking down all 32 teams leading up to my number one ranked team heading into next NFL season. And today we reveal the 28th ranked Washington Commanders, still getting used to saying that name, a team that is going to be a lot of fun to talk about because it's a squad that easily could shatter this 28th ranking. But at the same time, this is a team that, considering they have an aging head coach who is kind of on the hot seat here, this team has an unusual amount of youth and question marks that are going to need to be answered. And I'm excited to talk about what those spots on this team are. But before we do get into it, a lot goes into this series, and it's really important to me that these videos do well because this is all I have time for this summer. So if you could just take a second and hit that like button down below, it really does help. It's a free and easy way that genuinely does support my channel. It tells YouTube you enjoy the series and to push it out to other NFL fans just like you. And do make sure you're subscribed. Join me on this quest to 100,000 subscribers. We're getting so close, but you also will not miss any of these deep dives as we go. But let's go ahead and get started. As always, first off, taking a look at the key additions and subtractions for this team's offseason. And honestly, especially compared to the teams we've done so far, pretty status quo for Washington outside of some minor players leaving and some minor free agent additions, and then, of course, their draft. But they are losing some players and gaining some players, of course. And a coaching change as well that we're going to talk about, flipping from Scott Turner, the offensive coordinator, who I do think did a pretty good job last year. I'm not saying they made a mistake moving on from him for Eric Bieniemy or anything, but it is going to be interesting to see if that is ultimately an upgrade in the play calling department. But obviously the quarterback room as well is going to be one of those massive question marks that we're going to get to, where they're letting Carson Wentz go, they're letting Taylor Heineke go, bringing in Jacoby Brissett to compete with Sam Howell, their 5th-round pick last year. But beyond coach and quarterback, there are other important positions seeing some shakeup here. Really a lot of offensive line movement, where Trey Turner, their starting right guard from last year, Chase Roullier, who only played in 2 games last year and just, I think, is obviously a health concern at this point. But that is a center position that, as we'll see later in the video, is going to open up some question marks. And obviously some of those free agent signings you can see there with Nick Gates and Ricky Stromberg, hoping to, find a new franchise center between the two of those guys. Also, Wes Schweitzer, who played about a third of their games last year, a little bit more towards the end of the year. He is also no longer on the squad. And Andrew Norwell, their starting left guard for the entirety of last season, is currently on the roster, but is estimated to be released. He's currently on the PUP list. And after, at his age and after a rough year last year, he certainly is not someone they're counting on this year. Beyond the offensive line, they are going to lose a couple of starters on the defense. Cole Holcomb, although he was an injury guy, I suppose, who only played half of last season. And then Bobby McCain started at safety for this team last year. They really went with a lot of 3 safety looks. He played a lot of slot corner as well. And he was a stud for them last year, and they're going to have to replace those 970 snaps, which is certainly something we will discuss. Beyond that, a couple other notes. Armani Rogers, not that he was a superstar or anything, but definitely a player that was going to be interesting to see what year 2 would look like for him. He tore his Achilles, it sounds like, a week ago, and he's going to be unavailable this year. So some explosiveness in that tight end room is going to be missing, it sounds like. And then Shaka Toney, who showed flashes in his 52 snaps last year on the edge, is going to be a part of the gambling suspensions around the NFL, going to be out indefinitely. But beyond the losses, we do have some additions here. So we're going to talk about Eric Bieniemy momentarily, but they do bring in Jacoby Brissett, as we said. And then they're not just losing guys on the offensive line. They are shaking this thing up and really trying to improve that group. So Andrew Wiley is going to follow Eric Bieniemy over from Kansas City. Nick Gates, the starting center/guard from the New York Giants. They draft Ricky Stromberg in the 3rd round. Gonna be a conversation to be had for sure about what this offensive line is going to look like this year. But they are basically swapping Cole Holcomb for Cody Barton, who had hit a career year in Seattle last year and hoping to continue to improve here in Washington. They draft Emmanuel Forbes and Jartavis Martin in the secondary with their first 2 picks in the draft, and then some smaller day 3 additions include Chris Rodriguez, the running back out of Kentucky, Braden Daniels, an offensive lineman, and KJ Henry out of Clemson on the edge. So a pretty tame offseason, honestly, and they're really just counting on some of the youth taking that next step, and now the coaching to really elevate this squad to take them to the next level. And they're hoping that the hiring of Eric Bieniemy here as the offensive coordinator is going to help accomplish that. But let's circle back to the head coach first with Ron Rivera, who I kind of hinted at the top of the video is on the hot seat this year. This is year 4 of this Washington regime, and I do want to give him a tip of the cap. Washington, when they hired Ron Rivera, with all of these scandals and a potential, at the time, ownership change looming, they needed an adult in the building to help shelter a lot of the culture concerns around the entire organization. And he's come in and, it doesn't just apply to the football team. It applies to, business and PR and all of that. He has really maintained that standard of excellence throughout the organization to the best of his abilities. And I think thanks to Ron Rivera, this team is set up, whether it's with Rivera in charge or a different head coach ultimately, I think he's done a really good job of steering this organization in the right direction to the best of his abilities. He was the right man for the job, such a unique job. And I think without Ron Rivera, for example, that overall coach and culture grade that we apply to every team could be a lot worse with a lot of other head coaches running the show. So that's very commendable. But from a football perspective, I do think there's something to be said about Ron Rivera and really just coaches like Ron Rivera, these aging defensive-minded guys, the game kind of passing them by a little bit, whether it was Vic Fangio in Denver or Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. It's just so hard when you have grown up in a different era of football to acclimate yourself and modernize your vision for the team into the modern NFL, where whether that's from an X's and O's perspective, keeping up with all of these high-end explosive passing games that are using motion and RPOs and read options and you name it, all these new age passing concepts, you have to not just implement them yourself, and that's a big part of why they're bringing in Eric Bieniemy to hopefully keep this, coaching staff modernized. Moving on from a guy like Scott Turner, whose offense was a little bit more traditional, if you will. But also defensively, you have to evolve the way you coach and attack these types of offenses. And I think Rivera's solid at that. I think he's good. They rank to me in the tier 3 of good defensive coaching, but I view Ron Rivera at this point much more as a culture setter than some elite defensive mind. And we saw last year a defense that had expectations to be great, and they were just mediocre, honestly, average, if you will. And a lot of coverage busts and coaching points and, not picking up on screens and, having guys in the wrong place at the wrong times. There was just a lot of moments where I was like, this doesn't feel like some greatly coached defense. And I think it's a big reason why Rivera's on the hot seat, right? This team has got to win a playoff game probably if you're going to feel good about Rivera heading into next year. And obviously ranking 28, they have a lot to accomplish there or a long way to go until they can accomplish that. So overall, I still like Ron Rivera. He ranks for me as the 20th best head coach in the NFL. But that is a slight fall from grace, whereas maybe in his Panthers days, he was perceived as a top 10 premium head coach. And then as far as what Ron Rivera's scheme is going to look like, with, of course, Jack Del Rio under him, by the way, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Jack Del Rio. I think everything you say about Ron Rivera kind of also applies to Jack Del Rio from a defensive coaching perspective. It's a four-man front with a lot of kind of Fangio-styled, Fangio-inspired zone calls on the back end. It is going to be a lot of quarters, cover 6, and cover 3 with off coverage. They will press when appropriate, but they really do want to play off coverage and, read the quarterback's eyes, pass off, match zones on the back end, basically converting into man coverage. It's a big reason why they drafted a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, who I had always said needed to go to a kind of off-zone heavy system. It's a big reason they took Emmanuel Forbes in the draft, who I always felt like had to go to a system like this. But let's flip over to the offensive coordinator with Eric Bieniemy coming in. Definitely the most exciting thing for Commanders fans, other than maybe the ownership change, which is a big deal. But from a roster perspective, the Eric Bieniemy addition to the staff is huge. I mean, I think Scott Turner did a good job last year. I do want to say that first. But Eric Bieniemy for years has been perceived as this high-end head coach candidate, and he hasn't gotten a job for any variety of reasons, but you can't argue with the results in Kansas City. I think one key contributing factor to why he has not been hired, however, is it is impossible to separate what Bieniemy brings to the table from Andy Reid, who's been a premium offensive mind for 20 years, 25 plus years, and obviously Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in football. So for Bieniemy, this was a really good career move. Now, going to what we'll see shortly is a questionable quarterback room is going to be a tall task for him. But as far as doing what, say, Matt LaFleur did for Green Bay, where he was under Sean McVay, wasn't getting head coach offers, but went to Tennessee and showed what he can do as a play caller first. For Eric Bieniemy to take control and let's do it. Let's take command of this offense. It's going to be an opportunity for him to get a head coach offer if things go well here. And I don't know if it's going to happen in year one with a lot of the question marks at hand, but it is going to be interesting to see, if it's a good fit and they show good progress, is Eric Bieniemy someone that could be the head coach here in a couple of years, and potentially looking at a Bruce Arians handing the keys off to an existing staff member type of situation. So as far as what Bieniemy's scheme looks like, you really have 3 paths, 3 overall tree branches of offenses in the NFL. You have your Shanahan style schemes, which we've covered the last 4 deep dives, a lot of teams running the wide zone stuff. And then you have there's just a couple teams left that are a little bit more, I would just say, more stagnant pro style, a little bit more traditional, which is what this team kind of was under Turner last year. And then you have this wave of the Andy Reid guys, whether it's Doug Peterson or Eric Bieniemy here, Andy Reid, where it's going to be much more of a spread style offense in the NFL format, where you are going to see a lot more early down passing, a lot more shotgun on early downs, and especially using the pass as a part of the run game, implementing RPOs and bubble screens and spreading things out and quick hitting passes that will just easily get the ball in the hands of receivers and basically act as a function of the run game. So it's going to be much more of those types of concepts, spreading things out 2 by 2, trips left, isolating someone on one side. That's going to be what you're getting here in Washington, and certainly a modernized scheme here that's going to work well with Sam Howell, by the way, who ran a gazillion RPOs at North Carolina. And we'll get to that in just a second as we transition to the roster portion of this. But they're going to rank for me in the tier 2 of great offensive coaching in the passing game. I am optimistic that Eric Bieniemy is going to really be the guy we've been talking about. Andy Reid has basically openly admitted all of the cool red zone stuff that they do. That's Eric Bieniemy. He is super creative. He has called plays in Kansas City. He has orchestrated a lot of the game plans there. He's learned from the best for 10 years. And I'm excited for him to get this opportunity. When it comes to the run game, however, I think there are going to be some more question marks there. I've never felt like Kansas City's run game is overly creative or unique. It just kind of is what it is, and maybe a little bit more to prove there for Bieniemy. But obviously, one of the hires of the offseason and going to be a key cog for how successful this offense can be. Now, before we get into the roster portion of the video, I got to tell you, man, Underdog Fantasy continues to up their game as the best place to play fantasy football. You've probably already heard about their best ball competitions as well as their daily pick'em contests. Well, now they have season-long pick'ems for the NFL, where you can put your NFL knowledge to the test and select over or under on players' stats. Things like season-long passing yards, touchdowns, you name it. You can string together lineups and get up to 20 times your money when you win. I just threw this lineup together this week, and honestly, I think this might be my new favorite way to play on Underdog Fantasy after I just recently fell in love with their best ball competitions. So if you want to compete at Underdog Fantasy right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG, they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's $100 of free play, and you will support my channel in the process. So that's promo code TFG over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, let's get into the good stuff, the roster breakdown, where we, of course, have to talk about this unique quarterback situation with Sam Howell estimated to be the day one starter. Now, we are also going to talk about Jacoby Brissett, because I don't think it's a lock that Sam Howell is the day one starter, but I would be a little bit surprised if he wasn't. So Sam Howell comes out last year as a junior out of North Carolina, and there's a lot of hype about Sam Howell, especially amidst Washington Commanders fans, because if you go to like the mock drafts in 2021, you don't have to scroll too far to find Sam Howell's name. Some of them would have had Sam Howell potentially being the number one pick in the 2022 NFL draft. Now, the final year at North Carolina basically threw that all out the window, and a big reason for that is North Carolina's coaching staff just said, sorry, Sam Howell, we're not going to give NFL scouts a chance to see what you can do. You are going to run more RPOs than you ever thought was possible. We're going to get you going on designed QB runs to the point where you're one of the top rushing quarterbacks in all of college football. And all of the drop back passing game, basically, Sam, you can go fuck yourself. You're not going to get to do that. And it just made his evaluation so impossible. Matt Corral was also a victim of that. But if you go back to the year before, the hype was there for a reason. He was reading defenses, doing a lot more pro-style stuff back in, that would have been 2020. And he showed arm talent, mobility, pocket mobility, deep ball placement. And again, the excitement was there for a reason, and I think it's honestly rational for Commanders fans to want to see what Sam Howell can do. Now, should he have been a first-round pick? I thought it was possible, if Kenny Pickett could go in the first round. I didn't think it was crazy that Sam Howell could. I want to say Howell ended up my QB2 in that draft. It was tough because I basically had identical grades on Howell, Malik Willis, and Matt Corral. Most of those quarterbacks ended up in the third round. Howell in the fifth round was just dumb by the NFL. Like, even in a worst case scenario, I liked Howell a little bit more than like Hendon Hooker, for example, who was a top of the third round pick this year. I can't explain what happened in the draft last year, but the Commanders did get a free dice roll at a genuinely talented quarterback. And I think they handled it pretty well last year. I know there was a lot of Commanders fans clamoring to see Howell sooner than they did, but he was not ready. We described what happened at UNC. He is a young player. I don't know that that was going to be a situation conducive to his success. And as I've said in videos past, you never want to ruin a guy's confidence or have him develop bad tendencies when he's not ready. But they do put him in week 18. And while I think his performance was overrated by a lot of people, and the excitement for him is probably going a little bit too far based on how he played in that game, he did look competent, right? Like, he had some throws from the pocket, a lot of crossing route completions. He had a dime to Terry McLaurin, and that's, where you're going to get the most excited about Sam Howell is, as I mentioned, you go back to 2021 or 2020 at North Carolina, and his deep ball ability is gorgeous. He has such great touch, really good accuracy when he can get good receivers. When he had Diami Brown, who's on this roster, by the way, was a great deep threat at North Carolina. Things were cooking with gas at North Carolina, but Diami Brown goes pro, gets drafted here to Washington, among other things, and he didn't get to unleash that again in 2022. So it really is just going to come down to the mental development of Sam Howell, how well he works with Eric Bieniemy, and time will tell. I think step one is going to be, however, winning this starting job over the offseason. And if he can't do that, you're going to have some concerns about if the mental side of Sam Howell's game is up to speed. Because I like Jacoby Brissett, but if there is promise for a guy like Sam Howell in year two, you would expect that he can at least win this job for this coaching staff. Now, Jacoby Brissett was signed here for a reason, and he played really well in Cleveland last year. Honestly, well enough that he is a starting caliber quarterback. I do think he's the better quarterback right now, but he doesn't have the physical tools that someone like Sam Howell does have. But he was literally significantly better than what Deshaun Watson was for Cleveland last year. Now, a big part of that is Deshaun Watson played like absolute booty cheeks, but Jacoby was good. Like, he was maybe a top 20 quarterback last year. I don't think that's crazy to say. Would I expect him to repeat that in a different situation? No, but again, I think it's just, anytime you have a guy that's been around the league and has never shown huge upside, there's just a lack of appeal to that to a lot of staffs, right? But again, he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's got a strong arm. He's pretty accurate. He's really good at, especially when the structure of the offense is there, he's really good at taking what's there, not forcing things when the first read isn't there. But a lot of that lack of upside comes in. Okay, read one is taken away. How much is Jacoby bringing to the table after that as far as making the right reads throughout his progressions and adding things with his feet and having that pocket presence and extending plays and all that stuff? So a little bit is missing there for sure. But I got to say, man, if Jacoby happens to win this starting job, obviously you're a little bummed that you don't potentially get to see the upside of Sam Howell, but Washington's team ranking would actually jump a couple spots to the 26th team in my rankings if I knew Jacoby was the day one starter. So I do want to throw that note out there, but I do expect that this team elects to go with the fog of war and the allure of Sam Howell. But you also have that fallback option as well to lean back on a guy like Jacoby if it's a disaster class with Sam Howell. I don't even know if they're going to keep a third quarterback here with Jake Fromm, who, thank God, I eventually lowered him in my quarterback rankings in that draft class. I thought his tape was pretty good at Georgia, but the physical limitations are just absurd with him. I for months in the pre-draft process said Jake Fromm's going to be a first-round pick. Jake Fromm's going to be a first-round pick until March when I saw him throw a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, that's a noodle. That's a noodle right there. But I still think he could be a backup someday in the NFL, but not right now. And I didn't watch Tim DeMorat. But they are going to rank 32nd in the NFL with Sam Howell starting. It's just, even if he shouldn't have been a fifth-round pick, you're talking about a fifth-round pick that has started one game in the NFL. Such massive question marks there. Going to be, obviously, the number one reason the Commanders rank 28th in my rankings. But if some of that upside hits for Howell, you're starting to cook with this team. Because as we look now at the weaponry, and they would be 29th, by the way, with Jacoby, But the weaponry is pretty damn good here, and it's a very nice diversity of skill sets, which I always like to see with these receiving cores. So you start with Terry McLaurin, who's your true number one. Scary Terry is an absolute monster, and if this guy could ever get sustainable, good quarterback play, I can very confidently say Terry McLaurin would be in that conversation, honestly, all the way up there with guys like, yeah, screw it, I'll say it. He would be up there with Justin Jefferson, who's honestly, physically speaking, kind of similar build and athleticism to Terry. Terry's probably a little faster, whereas Jefferson's maybe a little stronger. But seriously, that's the type of athlete with size and quickness that you're talking about with Terry McLaurin. He makes absurd catches on a week-to-week basis and is a really good route runner and is awesome after the catch. There is nothing Terry McLaurin can't do. It's just a matter of proving that he can get to that, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase level production with great quarterback play someday. And hopefully he can be a part of maybe getting Sam Howell to that point. That's pretty unlikely, but that's the hope, right? So that's the foundation of this 13th ranked group of weapons. But beyond that, they draft Jahan Dotson in the first round last year. And he basically proved that he can play right away as soon as he got healthy, which did take some time. But, man, talk about a great compliment to Terry McLaurin. You can really line these guys up anywhere. Dotson thrives in the slot, but he can function as a deep threat as well. Better ball skills than you'd expect for a smaller receiver. So kind of the ideal number two for a guy like Terry McLaurin. Definitely the arrow pointing up for Jahan Dotson. Some people thought it was early when he went with the 16th pick in the draft. I definitely did not. I definitely think he would have been right in that cluster with Jackson Smith and Jigba and Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston and in the conversation for the best wide receiver in this current year's draft class. But I see kind of a Tyler Lockett-esque player and upside for someone like Jahan Dotson. And he's certainly capable of reaching that as early as this year if the quarterback play is welcoming to that level play. And then you got Curtis Samuel, who's the gadget third piece that a lot of offenses would love to have, a guy that you can even line up at running back, but jet sweeps, functioning from the slot as someone that can separate. He got pretty good ball skills for a shorter player. He's sturdy and not disturbed by contact. He is a little bit of a health risk, but was able to stay healthy last year and had a pretty good year. I want to say he's entering a contract year here in Washington. And if he was your number two, I think you've got some question marks. But for what he is as your third option, yeah, kind of hard to beat that, man. That's a good player to have in that position. And then you've got depth as well. Dyami Brown, who we talked about. It's funny, this team was hoarding Tim Settle for so long behind a really good depth chart, and I was always saying free Tim Settle. Now it's the same team, and I'm saying free Dyami Brown. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of wide receiver fours in the NFL that have this level of upside and intrigue for me. Every time he's been on the field, he's shown that he can play. I mean, he worked the Tennessee Titans in a game where Jahan Dotson was hurt. Has he been wildly consistent or anything? No, but he hasn't really gotten that opportunity to be a full-time starter. I loved him coming out. I thought in the third round it was reminiscent to me of when like Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson fell that far in the draft. And I feel that way about Dyami Brown if he ever gets that opportunity, but the clock's starting to tick on him now heading into year 3. Man, I'd be making calls about Dyami Brown if I were teams who were in need of a third wide receiver and a deep threat like Dyami Brown, which he was dominant at North Carolina. He has that rare deep ball tracking ability where he can see the ball over his shoulder and isn't disturbed by, flailing defensive backs doing whatever they can to get their hands on him or the ball. He just sees it in and comes down with a lot of those tough catches down the field, but I think his route running and elusiveness in the short to intermediate game are underrated too. So definitely got to keep your eyes on him, but his skill set is also a little bit redundant with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, so it's tough for him to get those deep ball looks. You got Marcus Kemp, who's spent some time with Bieniemy, and then Dax Milne, who was a 7th round pick several years ago, was Zach Wilson's deep threat. at BYU. But the other guy on this wide receiver depth chart that I'm really excited about is Mitchell Tinsley, who was a total my guy in this draft. You can go back to my guys video where I talked about him to get some even further analysis about Mitchell Tinsley. But this guy is Kendrick Bourne. Literally, physical pro comp, play style pro comp. Kendrick Bourne, a guy that did go undrafted. If he gets an opportunity, I believe in Mitchell Tinsley, maybe to eventually be this team's starting slot wide receiver. Got to make the team first, and he did go undrafted, so he's got an uphill battle, but definitely keeping my eyes on him. They also take Kazmir Allen, who I think they'll stash on the practice squad in case something happens to Curtis Samuel. Allen at UCLA was a gadget guy who lined up at running back a lot. So if they have plans for Curtis Samuel to flex into the backfield and give him jet sweeps and stuff, if Samuel gets hurt, you might see Allen get called up and get some of those looks. I'm not quite as crazy about the tight end room. I think it's one of the worst tight end rooms in the league, especially with the promise of Armani Rogers probably heading to IR for the year. But Logan Thomas at 32 years old, he obviously had his big breakout year several years after converting from quarterback. And he doesn't have a whole lot of athletic juice at this point. He's not a phenomenal route runner. He's not some incredible contested catch winner. He's fine. He's definitely still an above average athlete for tight ends, but he's not a great blocker. Like, there are moments where you're like, yeah, that's a quarterback that learned how to play tight end. It just hasn't always been a complete game at the tight end position from Logan Thomas, but he's fine. And if he can stay healthy, maybe he can bounce back and be a little bit better. But I think the arrow is pointing down for him to the point where he's now one of the worst starting tight ends in the NFL. And then you got John Bates, who I love his blocking, but that does come at the cost of athleticism and ability to separate. So if he's your number one, you're not happy with that. Cole Turner's kind of a receiving specialist at tight end, a red zone threat, a guy who can get out there and be a big-bodied target in certain, 12 personnel looks. Really, Armani Rogers getting hurt was the only semblance of upside that this room had. And Rogers did show some flashes last year as a converted quarterback project type. Maybe the injury's not as bad as I'm currently hearing, but it's not looking great for him to play this year, unfortunately. It's just one of those things man, Armani Rogers got hurt. I was interested to see what he could do this year. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, but still young, still potential career ahead of him. As far as the running backs go, Gibson really solidified himself last year in the receiving game. Now, he kind of got dethroned as a running back here by Brian Robinson, but as far as the receiving chops go, this is a guy that was a receiver at Memphis and has a lot of those skills. Like, he's always been a pretty good route runner. It's just been a matter of consistently seeing the ball in with his hands and converting to runner after the catch, showing those smooth skills. Also has shown year-by-year improvements as a pass protector, which is so important if you're going to be a designated third down back. And I think he's established. He's arrived. The first I think he had 3 drops in the first 5 weeks of last season, but from week 6 on, no drops. Was really efficient, made guys miss, taking those dump offs, catching balls to the flat. You like what you have in him as a really good receiving back for sure. Beyond that, Brian Robinson, Chris Rodriguez are much more tighter, basically screen catching, screen pass catching. Running backs not going to offer a whole lot beyond that. And then, it's all about Antonio Gibson if you want any sort of upside from the receiving backs here. So 13th for weaponry, hopefully can help Sam Howell climb them out of that 32nd ranked quarterback room as the year goes on. But the quarterback isn't the only big question mark for this team, because I think a lot of people are going to see that 28th ranking and are like, that's way too low. Look at that defensive line. They're insane. And yeah, it's a really good defensive line, and we'll get to that. But I mentioned the quarterback concerns, and you've got some pretty major offensive line concerns as well. They chose really not to do a ton about it this offseason. Inevitably, they had to do something because this was genuinely one of the 3 worst offensive lines in all of football last year, who had some really concerning weeks. they were basically putting a new lineup out there every single week. They want some semblance of consistency here, and I'm not sure they found it, because I'm listing these 5 right here as the starters. Together, they're going to rank 24th for pass blocking around the league, so maybe a little bit better than what they had last year, but 31st for run blocking. You're really lacking explosiveness up front from these guys. And this group probably will look different at times throughout the year, and this might not be the week 1 starting lineup, but I'm showing you, to me, what I think is their best group of 5 right now, and what I would predict them to ultimately reach the conclusion that this is their group, even if it's not listed this way on the depth chart right now or how these guys are playing right now in OTAs. But let's get through it. So left to right, you've got Charles Leno at left tackle, who is getting older and showing signs of regression, still very consistent in pass protection. Leno has always been that guy where he is one of the lesser athletes at the tackle position. It's why he was, I think, a 7th round pick by the Bears. So when he loses, it is ugly. You see his feet slowing, and guys can just burn him. Sometimes everything falls apart, and he gets dominated by power. And Nick Bosa ate Charles Leno's lunch in week 17 or whatever. And that's when, Leno has a game like that every year where it's like fans are out on the guy. But the Bears, the second they let Leno go, they've basically been a turnstile at left tackle. And you very quickly realize, like, oh, wait, I'll take those 14 good games of Charles Leno over, starting guys like Trent Scott at left tackle, for example. So he is underrated, but he is also kind of declining and getting up there in age. Again, as I said, already not the best athlete. So as that athleticism gets a little bit worse every year, losing between the margins is going to be more common for him, but still the best they have in pass protection, and I think can keep Howell's blind side mostly safe. A really mediocre run blocker, though, because of that lack of athleticism. Much more comfortable and fluid moving backwards and through his technique, but not much of a grinder in the trenches, if you will. You got Nick Gates, who they gave solid money to. A lot of fluff in that contract. I think it was on face value like 3 years, $18 million. I think they gave him a $5 million signing bonus. So he's going to be a starter here, whether it's at center or a guard. He's started plenty of games for the Giants at either of those spots. So you do have flexibility there to kind of let this group mesh in, like I said, like to the best available line that they can play. I'm putting him at left guard here for now, because I think getting Ricky Stromberg in there at center as that 3rd round pick makes a lot of sense when you look at the rest of the interior players here. But again, very interchangeable with Nick Gates, who's just a scrappy, solid NFL starter on the offensive line. He's done a really good job to get healthy. He could not stay healthy in New York, and I think ultimately that's why New York wanted to move on from him. Was long-term they had some concerns about his durability, and certainly durability among the offensive line has been an issue for Washington, so there's going to be some question marks there, but beyond that, you kind of know what you're getting in Nick Gates. He's not going to be a huge problem for you, but he's not going to be locked down every single snap either. And then assuming Ricky Stromberg is starting at center, like I said, I liked his tape as a run blocker. He has that road grader mentality, has to have a wrestling background because he just has that good core strength. He can, reach guys from bizarre angles and turn his hips and torque guys. And I like that about him. Just not a special athlete. And it definitely shows up if left one-on-one in pass protection. But if you're going to have a weak link on your offensive line in pass protection, it's okay to be the center. Some teams can isolate that guy, and on those snaps, you will see them losing ugly. But for the most part, your center is always going to be engaged in double teams and can hold up okay if that's a problem for them. So as a 3rd round pick, I thought it was fine. Reminds me a lot, honestly, of Jacksonville taking Luke Fortner last year, where there was some hype for him as a 3rd round pick. I was like, he'll be okay. He's not a great player, but you can get by, and that's kind of exactly what happened. Similar scheme and system in Jacksonville as well, with Doug Peterson running the Andy Reid style offense. So I think he'll be just fine. And that's why I think he'll be their starting center. I think it's just one of those cases where they're not going to just gift a third-round pick the job in OTAs. So once we get to training camp, definitely someone to see like, okay, week 2 of the preseason, he's taking reps with the ones, and then by the time we arrive to week 1, he gets named the starter. That's kind of what I'm projecting for him. And then you got Sam Cosmi. Interestingly enough, looks like he is going to slide into right guard. He's played a little bit there. He's played I think both sides of the line at tackle, but certainly at right tackle. It's just so weird for me to think of a 6'7" guard. You just don't see a lot of those guys. You got really 2 that I can think of are Andres Pete, who very often does struggle to get leverage and has a lot of ugly losses at guard. Because when you're that tall and you're going against these 6'2" ridiculous power rushers, that's just instant auto loss of leverage. So it's really tough. But Washington did see Brandon Sheriff get by for a long time at 6'7" at guard. So it is reminiscent of that. Kind of similarly, Cosmi is a really good run blocker. But again, how consistently can he win that leverage at guard? It's going to be interesting to see, but he's a good player. I've always believed in Cosmi. Sometimes his feet let him down in pass protection, especially at tackle, but that should be a strength at guard. So there's upside there, but the 6'7" guard thing for me is weird. And I'm also curious, like, if he gets flexed back out to tackle, depending on which lineup they think is best. I think that's still in play. But I believe in Sam Cosmi. Never thought he should have gone in the second round. I thought he was a true first-round guy. And he's proved out to be, I would say, very like almost Mike McGlinchey-esque, but maybe a better comp would be Caleb McGarry for Atlanta. But that's besides the point. I'm not worried too much about Cosmi. Right tackle, they bring in Andrew Wiley on a decent free agent deal. Nothing massive, but definitely enough to say you're our starting right tackle. And, you know, he's solid. He's been reliable for the Chiefs. He has, kind of like Charles Leno, he has weeks where he has just these horribly ugly games. And it's usually against like Max Crosby, a Bosa brother, a Myles Garrett, like Micah Parsons type, where you're going against length and speed and power. And he's a lighter tackle built like a guard trying to hold up out there. And sometimes those physical tools just let him down, but his technique is really good. And he's a willing run blocker, but a lot of times that like athleticism is a detractor in the run game as well. So they're really hoping to go with the lack of a weak link approach, whereas last year they certainly had multiple weak links on this offensive line. Now, you have some other options and some other guys that we might see as a part of this starting group. So the first guy I actually want to talk about is Chris Paul, because right now he's listed as their starting left guard. That's like, man, all of a sudden you're like, that's a weak link immediately. I like the idea of Chris Paul like 3 years from now with good coaching, but he got one start last year, showed not just in pass protection where he had a really bad he started the last game of the year against Washington. They wanted to get a look at him. They wanted to get a look at Howell. But you could see the tools with Chris Paul. He had some really nice run blocks and stuff, but also he missed a stunt in pass protection, lost a couple reps there as well. And even just in the run game, as far as like knowing when to break off of the double teams and climb to the second level, he's just so raw. I would be really concerned if he's actually starting. I mean, maybe that's a good sign that he beat out some of these guys, but I will be very surprised if he stays the starting guard. But again, there is physical upside there, and I could understand why a Commanders fan would be excited about the idea of Chris Paul. But then you also have Cornelius Lucas, who's been kind of the ideal sixth man at tackle for his whole career. If he's starting, he's kind of Andrew Wiley-esque, honestly, where it's like, yeah, he's going to have some rough weeks, but for the most part, for a backup, that's a really good tackle. He might be the best backup tackle in the NFL, and that's kind of been him. He's like who is it, J.R. Smith? He's been all around the NBA. He's like always the sixth man of the year candidate. It's kind of Cornelius Lucas for an offensive line, at least at the tackle position. You also have Tyler Larson, who started a bunch of games at center for them last year and was a train wreck. Sadiq Charles, who is Chris Paul-esque as far as athletic upside there, a 4th-round pick several years ago. He's had some good starts, but he has some really ugly losses on film as well in pass protection that you're worried about. Andrew Norwell is still lurking here, but he is expected to be released. He really struggled last year and showed immense regression, so I think they're ready to move on from him. I'm not going to spend any more time on him. And then you also draft Braden Daniels, who I think will round out their 9 or 10 players that make this team. He was a 4th-round pick, another, they have some athletes to work with. Chris Paul, Sadiq Charles, and Braden Daniels. They're all kind of lumped together as your developmental offensive linemen. And really all guys with tackle guard flexibility, especially Charles and Daniels. Paul, I can't remember if he was a tackle in college or not. I think he was next to Tyler Smith as a guard there at Tulsa. But there's your offensive line. I'm going to rank 24th for pass blocking, 31st for run blocking. And let's round out the offensive side of the ball with the running back room, as well as a little bit of conversation about what Sam Howell's going to bring to the table as a rushing threat. So the Commanders are going to rank towards the bottom of the league at running back, 27th. I don't mind Brian Robinson. I think he's more just a guy as an NFL starting running back. Good vision, decent explosiveness, can break tackles, pick up tough yardage. Honestly, you could do a lot worse than Brian Robinson. You could certainly do a lot better. I think he showed right away as a rookie that he can play and was kind of what we expected from him out of Alabama. Showing a lot of the same traits. Do I ever see him being a game changer? Not particularly. But he's certainly not going to hold you back, just as a lot of these running back rooms are kind of that way. And then you have Antonio Gibson next to him. I like to think that they will see this as your typical 1st and 2nd downs go to Brian Robinson, 3rd downs go to Antonio Gibson. The thing with Gibson as a runner is he has possibly the worst vision out of any quote-unquote starting running back in the NFL. Constantly looking to bounce things outside, very DeAndre Swift-esque in that way. A nightmare for a head coach where if it's 3rd and 3, you don't know if this guy's going to take what's there and move the chains because he's always headhunting. And you're going to get those explosive, exciting runs in there, but that's going to come at the cost of 2 other runs where he got way less than he was supposed to. So 3rd downs as a receiving back, that doesn't hurt you as much. But if he's your full-time starter, you really just can't live with that. But I do like him as a compliment to a guy like Brian Robinson. And you mesh these two together, and it works. But it does key off a little bit to your opponent, like what's coming a little bit more, as opposed to having that true 3-down back that can be out there for running plays and passing plays. I think you also just have to note Curtis Samuel. We talked about him earlier, but he got like 36 carries last year. I expect them to do that as well as getting him involved on jet sweep pop passes and stuff, which have been a Eric Bieniemy special. So definitely expecting Curtis Samuel to be a function of this run game, which is another solid piece there. Chris Rodriguez, liked this pick in the 5th round. Honestly, reminded me a lot of Brian Robinson at Alabama, where he's really good at fighting through arm tackles and good vision, good ball security. I got to him pretty late in the process for the pre-draft, and I think he ended up my number 11 running back. So I do think as a backup to Brian Robinson and his role, he makes a lot of sense. And with Curtis Samuel being a part of this, I honestly think they just keep 3 backs. Jonathan Williams, Jarrett Patterson are fine, but inconsequential assets to this team. Now, talk about assets to this team. I think one of the best things Sam Howell will certainly bring to the table right away is what he's going to bring as a runner, where he is legitimately a running back in a quarterback's body. I mean, he is thick. He's like 210, maybe 220 pounds. He carries it well, and he will run through arm tackles, and he has good vision. He has some shiftiness and creativity as a runner. Honestly, I kind of went out on a limb a little bit in the pre-draft where I was like, Sam Howell is pretty close to what Malik Willis is as a runner. He's not quite as fast as far as long speed, but he's a legitimate threat, and I expect that they will integrate read options and create numbers advantages with him as he learns the game, kind of similar to what we've seen with guys like Lamar and Jalen Hurts. Not quite on that level as a runner, but to a similar effect as far as keeping him comfortable. It's a confidence booster. It really is. You have a big 15-yard pickup, run over a linebacker or whatever that he's capable of doing, and you're a little bit more calm and composed dropping back on that next third down. So I do like what that's going to bring to the table here for Washington for sure. Jacoby as well can do some of that stuff. He's slow, but he's big. Like, he's hard to tackle. So if he's in there, a slight bump. So that wraps up the offense. They are going to be 28th in the passing game. It's tough. They got pass protection concerns and quarterback concerns. Pretty straightforward. Run game as well. I think it's just, there's not a really standout asset for this run game, whether that's coaching or run blocking or running backs. The best unique thing they have is Sam Howell as a design QB threat. Everything else is just kind of mediocre, and it's just hard to rank that high without a standout asset for that run game. But let's now flip over to the defensive side of the ball. And we're going to start with the best thing that this Commanders team has to offer, and that's the defensive line. And I alluded to this earlier, that a lot of people are going to think this ranking is low for the Commanders, a team that did win 8 games last year, and a team that has genuinely one of the best defensive lines in all of football, especially as far as having a complete starting 4, assuming Chase Young can get healthy. And that's honestly probably the biggest pivot factor for this defense as far as can they be an elite defense. They're going to need some other things to fall in line as well. But Chase Young was viewed as a pass rusher worthy of being the number 1 overall pick. And some people went as far as saying a generational talent as a pass rusher. I didn't quite go that far. I honestly thought Nick Bosa was a better prospect. And I thought there was a little bit of like Jadeveon Clowney-esque floor in Chase Young's game. And we're kind of seeing that world play out at this point in time, but it's definitely not set in stone. The thing with Chase Young is availability has been so hard for him. And he is a player who I did have as a low comp, like worst case scenario, Jadeveon Clowney, because he is one of these pass rushers that was able to be completely dependent on his physical tools to win at the college level, and he didn't show that full pass rush tool belt to pair with those tools. And we haven't yet seen that tool belt come out at the next level, and until it does, this is what he's going to be. He's going to be a guy that can win off of power and speed and bend and pursuit to the quarterback, but the NFL is just different, man. And Chase Young has had his ups and downs. He certainly, did he win Defensive Rookie of the Year? Was certainly a candidate. I think he won it. Like, his rookie year was his best year because he was healthy and available. But even when he's been out there in his second year and when he came back off the injury last year, there's just been a lot of games where you don't really feel his presence. And considering the hype on Chase Young coming out, that's not what you wanted to say about him in year 3. You wanted to be talking about him like the other Ohio State pass rusher in Nick Bosa. And it's just not the case. Really not a bad thing to say about him in run defense. That's the other reason he got a Jadeveon Clowney comp, is like, well, worst case scenario, he's going to win off of physical tools as a pass rusher, and he's going to be a pain in the ass to block in the run game because it's not like effort or play strength or gap discipline are an issue for Chase Young. Like, he's a really good run defender, and even rushing back from the injury last year, I can't even say rushing back because it did take a while for that knee to heal, but getting back from the injury last year, he was still a really good presence as a run defender. So honestly, like, these other 3 guys are just waiting on Chase Young to come along, and in an ideal scenario, he can be the alpha. And I think the thought of that is ultimately why he probably won't get traded here. It does sound like they're entertaining offers. Like, if someone's going to offer a first-round pick for Chase Young when they got to pay all these other guys, they'd probably make that trade. But I don't see that happening. I don't see anyone offering a first for Chase Young, and I don't know why Washington would necessarily take less than that. I could definitely be wrong. I thought the Cardinals might get a day 2 pick for DeAndre Hopkins, and they ended up releasing him. So what do I know? But the NFL's weird with these transactions sometimes. But Besides the point, the rest of these three guys have arrived, and they're hoping Chase Young can join them. You have Jonathan Allen, I think, is their best player among these three. Although I think there's a debate there, because Daron Payne actually outplayed John Allen in certain spots last year, and Montez Sweat really broke out last year. So these guys are really awesome as a trio, and that might be enough for Washington to say, you know what, we don't need Chase Young. That's sunk cost. We've got our three guys right here. We'll build around these three, and that's not a bad plan. I mean, Jonathan Allen's definitely one of the 5 best pass rushing interior players in the league. I mean, he has the full package. He has power. He has quickness. He has finesse. You name it. He can throw anything at you and beat you in any given way. His game did take kind of a surprising dip in production in the last 5 games of last season. Really uncharacteristic for him. Just 6 pressures and a sack in his last 5 games. Ultimately, he left the Cleveland game, though, and didn't return for the rest of the year. So I think it's fair to assume there was something going on injury-wise, and I'm sure that probably came out, and I just aren't doing my full research there, but it's pretty straightforward. Like, I think he was playing hurt, which hurt his overall production towards the end of last year, but I guess some of that might be speculation. Anyway, love John Allen, expecting big things from him this year. I think a potential career year could happen this year for John Allen. In his theoretical physical prime here at 28 years old. Not quite what he is as a pass rusher, as a run defender. Kind of notorious for actually grading out quite poorly as a run defender, if you just look at the PFF grades. But he did have a career high in defensive stops last year. And you watch the tape and you're like, yeah, I mean, he's still pretty damn good against the run, man. He is a handful. He's really quick. He knifes into the backfield, and as I said, a career high in defensive stops last year is really impressive. There are plays, though, where he might shoot the wrong gap and lose some of that discipline. I think that's a big part of where some of those poorly graded efforts come in. But overall, I'm not worried about it, man. I feel very comfortable with him next to Daron Payne defending the run, especially when you got Montez Sweat and Chase Young squeezing the edge. But Daron Payne also had a bit of a breakout last year. His emergence as a pass rushing presence has been a very pleasant surprise for this group. There was never really a concern that he was going to be a good run defender. And another guy that doesn't grade out all that well, we've talked about this already in this deep dive series, but these schemes that are a nickel-based defense like Washington is, it's really hard to play nose. And Daron Payne isn't Vita Vea or a true 340-pound, 330-pound monster in the middle, and he does see a lot of double teams, so it's just a tough ask schematically. But if he's one-on-one, he's got great technique against the run, great play strength, and all that. So I still like what you get to the table. It's just more of a matter of choice for this scheme that Daron Payne is ultimately going to grade out poor by PFF standards against the run. And I'm referencing that because I think that's a conversation that probably comes up a lot among Washington circles, is how does this duo, known as one of the best interior duos in the league, always grade out so poorly against the run? I'm just trying to offer some explanations for that from PFF's perspective. But again, took big strides as a pass rusher last year too. Really learning how to take over his guy, get that really nice first step as a bull rusher, and starting to implement some good like push and pulls, some swim moves, and evolving his game overall to the point that this is arguably the best pass rushing interior duo in the league. And then you pair that with Montez Sweat, who broke out last year as a pass rusher. Sweat has really, since the moment he came into the league, been, in my mind, one of the poster boys for elite edge run defense. 265 pounds, elite length, ridiculously strong, plays with a chip on his shoulder, and has reached a level of confidence in setting the edge that it's just hard to find around the league. So if you're running wide zone, I don't suggest running it towards Montez Sweat, but running it at Chase Young is not a great alternative either, right? So that's an asset for sure. But as a pass rusher, there's still some inconsistencies in his game because he doesn't have the most diverse skill set, and he's a little bit more reliant on getting those favorable matchups. Like if he gets to face Andrew Wiley 18 times a game or 18 times a season, you're going to see him with 100 pressures and 25 sacks. But when he's got to go against all of these crazy athletes at offensive tackle, he can't just win with that length and power. He's got good bend, though. Like, he does threaten with speed, and I think that was the next step in his game this year, was starting to mix things up a little bit more as opposed to just going straight to the bull rush. And now that he's started to unlock that, do we start to see even more swim moves and different counter moves and really taking that next step? I mean, there's definitely a world where he hasn't reached his upside yet. He hasn't received his contract extension yet either. But ultimately, I was just really impressed by him taking that next step as a pass rusher, letting those physical tools come through. And this has been obviously a very optimistic conversation. This is the best thing that Washington does have to offer, but they do rank 7th for pass rush and D-line run defense. It is worth noting that they don't have that perennial defensive player of the year game changer on this defensive line that really all of the other pass rushes that rank above Washington here do have. That guy that you say, if you leave him one-on-one, he is winning that every single time. Jonathan Allen's close to that. But if Chase Young can become that guy, this is a legacy pass rush. That's why they built this team this way. They built it through this D-line, and you're definitely not worried about it, to say the least. Now, they do have good depth, too. Let's just go through the edge depth. F.A. Obata, who is a NFL international guy who climbed up through, I think, Carolina's practice squad. I think he was on that Hard Knocks with Ron Rivera. And he's turned into a pretty good player. He's really physically talented. He's kind of a poor man's Montez Sweat, honestly. So a nice guy to bring in with speed and size and length. That's just a handful. And he can get after the quarterback a little bit. You also have James Smith-Williams and Casey Toohill, who took nice steps up last year as rotational run defenders, had to start a lot of games while Chase Young was injured, but now can resume their role, their rightful role, really, as just guys that can eat 10 snaps a game and hold up okay. And then they also draft KJ Henry late in the draft, and I've definitely seen some hype on him. I don't see starter tools in his game, but maybe someday a guy that can be a third pass rusher, good depth. I liked his inside counters, got really quick feet, but not someone with a good anchor against the run, and certainly not someone that can rush with power. So I just thought he wasn't a complete enough edge rusher to see him becoming a starter in the NFL, but not that it was a bad pick, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a relevant rotational rusher down the road for this team. They got more names too, but it's a deep group. They take Andre Jones in the 7th round. I don't even know if they're going to have room for him. He might end up on the practice squad, along with like William Bradley King, and then of course Shaka Toney as well showed flashes, but he's going to be suspended for the year. So a very deep group of edge players and a pretty deep group of interior players too. Fedarian Mathis might as well be a rookie this year. I think he played like 14 snaps last year. He got hurt. 2nd round pick I thought was a little bit rich for him, but a solid, balanced player at Alabama. I always saw him as a good 3rd defensive lineman, someone that doesn't have insane physical tools, but can do a little bit of everything. And I think this is the perfect spot for him to be that rotational guy off the bench. Your triad of Alabama defensive tackles there. John Ridgeway as well, a big, plodding, run-stuffing 5th round pick out of Arkansas. He's fine for what he is. Honestly, Abdullah Anderson caught my eye when I was watching Falcons tape. I think he was 98, and I kept having to be like, wait, who's 98 again? Oh, it's Abdullah Anderson. I was like, where did he go? Oh yeah, Washington. I got to remember that when we get to their deep dive. And yeah, like he did some nice stuff. He's bounced around the league, but has never really gotten huge opportunities. Not someone that like jumped out of the box score or anything like that. But I think as a guy with Fedarian Mathis to kind of be rotational depth, I like that signing. Keep an eye on him to be a nice kind of sneaky player for them. Benning Potoe or Potoai? I don't know how to say that. I'm sure you guys in the chat can let me know. But he had a couple nice splash run stops late last season as well if he makes the squad. But obviously an excellent defensive line with the potential really to be the best defensive line in the NFL, all contingent on Chase Young getting healthy and reaching his theoretical upside. But right now, Chase Young is the worst of the group, and I don't think you can even remotely argue that, but a good problem to have, to say the least. Let's run through these linebackers. It's mostly an inconsequential group, honestly, at an inconsequential position for the most part. Cody Barton especially, I think he's fine. He had a decent year for Seattle, doing a little bit of everything, full-sized guy, smart player, decent athleticism, decent discipline and reading his keys. I don't have a ton to add about Cody Barton. I think it was a fine signing. I think he's a decent starter, and that is what it is. Jamin Davis is much more fascinating. First-round pick in 2021. Really sucked when he came into the league, and that wasn't a huge surprise. That's kind of the beauty of the beast with the linebacker position, especially with these insane athletes that are still very much learning the position that I've talked about in the past. Is genuinely possibly the hardest position, at least on the defensive side of the ball, but maybe in all of football to play right now with RPOs and the way games are attacking that position with play action and all that, having to tackle these athletes in space. It's hard as hell, man. And he had his lumps early on, certainly, but second half of last year, he started to pop, and the arrow is trending up for a guy with immense physical tools for the position. Loved to see his tackling consistency come together. You could just see a more confident player. Like in 2021, we talked about this in the deep dive for this team last year. He would chase guys to the sideline and look like a lost duckling out there, just could not get guys to the ground. Very different in the second half of last year. And that confidence is huge for a guy that they're asking to have that sideline to sideline command of the offense, really. And you started to see him key in on runs better and really start to come together. So the coaching staff doing a good job bringing him along. Obviously, kind of passing the keys to him. I don't know if he's going to wear the green dot or be a team captain or anything like that, but letting Holcomb go and keeping Jamin Davis as their primary linebacker here next to Cody Barton. They're 1A, 1B, if you will. But I don't think this group is really likely to make or break this team's season. I think certainly Jamin Davis can make some more strides this year. He's probably a whole nother year away from even entering the conversation of being a Dre Greenlaw or a Roquan Smith or something like that. I'm not even going to think about throwing Fred Warner's name out there because he's a different type of animal out there. But I don't have any issues with this group. You also have David Mayo as that veteran presence. He's been around Ron Rivera, it feels like, his whole career. He's fine as a backup. Khaleke Hudson I like as a weak side backer. If they do want to run 3 linebacker sets, bigger packages and stuff, he's part safety, part linebacker. He can run and chase and tackle, and they played him as well in that Dallas game at the end of the year. There was one play where he ran the pole. They called cover 2, and he ran the pole with CeeDee Lamb down the seam. So he's got speed, he's got some coverage ability. I don't think he's ever going to be a full-time starter, but theoretically as a weak side backer, I think he's the guy I'd want to see out there. But yeah, they rank 26th for coverage, 22nd for run defense. Again, I don't think this unit's going to make or break this team's season. But a much more fascinating conversation to me with this secondary that has a wide range of outcomes. A lot of youth, honestly, with this group, which is just going to add variance. There's upside, there's athleticism, there's a chance for this to be a really special group. But there's also a chance, a lot of rookie DBs do struggle out the gate, and if that happens, that very well might make or break this team's defense overall. But someone that's not going to make or break the results of this team's season is Kendall Fuller, who's a mainstay starting, dare I say, number 1 corner, especially in a zone-heavy kind of split safety, off-coverage style scheme. He's everything you could ask for. He's got fluid hips to turn and click and close. He's got a really high IQ to read the quarterback's eyes, make plays on balls. Not the biggest guy, so that's why you want him in one of these systems. Not this incredible bump and run. Not the fastest guy either. But yeah, in an off-zone system, you're very satisfied with Kendall Fuller out there. He's just a mainstay. That's the best way to put it for him. Physical on the outside against the run too. But you're going to be starting your first-round corner, you would think, in Emmanuel Forbes, opposite of him. And there's no reason to think that he can't absolutely ball out in his rookie year. It's just, like I said, a tough position to do that at right away. But I did say with Emmanuel Forbes, he is one of the most unique prospects I've ever evaluated at any position because he absolutely had to go to a system that ran off zone coverage until the sun comes down. And that's what's going to happen in Washington. And I say that because he's a literal twig, 165 pounds at 6'1". If he tried to press guys or play bump and run or stay physical throughout the route in the NFL, it's over for him. The wind could push this guy over, let alone AJ fucking Brown in this division. But you let him play off cover 3, off cover 4, where he's starting, 8 yards off of the receiver. He has elite traits to play those assignments. He's got the length to help get in the way of passing lanes and help his recovery. He has absurd first step acceleration because he's so light and he's twitchy, but he has the mind as well for the position to play these schemes. He has that aggressiveness. He understands route combinations. He understands when certain teams are going to try to attack him with an out route or a hitch route. And he, unlike a lot of corners that run these schemes, isn't going to give this ridiculous amount of cushion underneath. And that's the best thing you can ask. Kendall Fuller does this as well, but that's the best thing you can ask from these off-zone corners is to not just defend the deep ball because he's got good speed and all that, but those quick-hitting passes to the outside are the biggest issue with these quarters' defenses, and Emmanuel Forbes has a chance to be a unique weapon to really take away one quarter of the field every play. I am really excited to see him get a chance to do what he did at Mississippi State here in the NFL. And this guy had 32 picks over his last, I think, 5 years of football going back to high school. That doesn't happen as a fluke. So was it a surprise when they took him 16th overall ahead of a guy like Christian Gonzalez, who was a lot of people's, I don't want to say CB1 because Witherspoon was so good, but it wasn't a huge surprise that he landed to a scheme like this and that a team running this scheme really prioritized his skill set over a guy like Gonzalez, who wasn't as instinctive in those situations as Emmanuel Forbes. Gonna be fun, to say the least. Who CB3 is here, or who their 5th defensive back is gonna be really also interesting. So there's like 3 options here. And I think their top 2 options are going to be Benjamin St-Juste and rookie Jatavis Martin. But all these guys are very different. So Benjamin St-Juste is a 6'3" corner who I think could play slot for them. He's started games in the slot. He has uniquely quick feet for such a big guy. And I kind of like him best as a slot corner, kind of as that like Isaiah Oliver role. I think it could work. Good run defender as well because he's really his tackling fell off last year out of nowhere. But you go back to 2022 and at Minnesota, really secure tackler. I don't expect those missed tackles to show up again. I think he's in play to be the starting slot, as is Jatavis Martin. So I and many people had Martin as a safety who could do as much as run like single high and cover 3, but definitely someone that played a lot of slot corner at Illinois. Could be a split safety type of dude and run a lot of quarters and 2 high, can play down in the box as a strong safety. He's just a versatile defensive back. This team very well might say, hey, you were a slot corner at Illinois. Can you just be a slot corner for us? And I think it could work. I think as far as staying in NFL wide receivers' hip pockets man-to-man, there's going to be some learning curves trying to play from the slot right away. And that's why you might go with more of a veteran presence like St-Juste. But the other interesting option to me, and I don't know if this is ideal or not, this is probably if you really don't like Juste or Martin in the slot, would be Danny Johnson, who's been a my guy for a long time. I was so happy to see him be kind of next in line with these. There's a renaissance around the league of these teams who run this system for a lot of the reasons we described with Emmanuel Forbes, not being able to play press man, bump and run coverage, but with guys like Danny Johnson and Darius Williams and DJ Reed. Like, you can take a 5'9" corner who's quick and instinctive. These guys for years and years have been pigeonholed into the slot because they're too short to play on the outside. Not in this kind of system. These guys usually actually are better outside doing what they did in college, because college wasn't afraid to play them, and they're always small school guys for the most part. But they're really brilliant, high IQ, quick corners that all kind of get lumped together to me that can actually play really well on the outside. And Danny Johnson showed that last year, man. Duke Shelley was another one from Minnesota last year. And he gets brought back on a 2-year extension here. I think it was 2 years, $9 million, so it was real money. They liked Danny Johnson. They just liked Emmanuel Forbes a little bit more. I think he's a legit option to play as a starter if you maybe want to put Kendall Fuller in the slot. Fuller's played some slot. Danny Johnson could maybe be a slot too. Like, they have options for sure. I like this cornerback room. A lot of unique skill sets and a lot of good scheme fits as well. So I'm excited to see who they end up starting really between those three options. You've also got Rashad Wildgoose, who played some slot for them last year. Decent depth, I suppose, now that he's got some playing time under his belt. Christian Holmes, a 7th-round pick last year. Castro Fields was a pick I liked for the Niners. Didn't work out. He's on this team, probably going to be a practice squad option. And Troy Apke trying to make that switch from safety to corner with his insane athleticism. So it's a deep cornerback room, which is much more than they could have said last year for sure, especially before Danny Johnson broke out late in the year for them. But as far as the safeties go, you do got to remember they ran a lot of 3 safety packages last year with Bobby McCain, and that's, I think they viewed Jartavis Martin as that role. So that's very much like an indicator that Martin's going to be that guy. But anyway, Curl and Forrest have their roles established, I think, at this point, especially Cam Curl, who's one of the higher IQ, smart, physical safeties in the league. He's full-sized as well. He's like 6'1", 205, and that certainly shows up as a run defender. And he's smart in coverage. I'm not trying to say he's a bad coverage player, but he's just not a very splashy coverage player. He's not some ball hawk with crazy range who can play the single high stuff. And they don't really use him that way. They'll put him on tight ends. They'll have him buzz down. He can do the quarter stuff, certainly. But he's just an overall mainstay, and you know what you're getting from him down in, down out. Derek Forrest, on the other hand, is much more of that athlete with the playmaking potential on the back end. If they go single high, assuming it's not Jartavis Martin, which it could be, Derek Forrest is the guy that can play single high and cover 3, but he's really instinctive, buzzing down into a hook zone as well, and he's really aggressive too, which I love his play style. Honestly, Forrest was one of my better like day 3 draft calls years ago. I was in a very small minority that let alone had Forrest on my radar, but had him over James Wiggins out of Cincinnati in that draft, who was like a projected day 2 guy. I go on this rant all the time, but I'm proud of this take. I said, no, James Wiggins is trash. You want Derek Forrest. And everyone was like, Derek who? Derek Forrest was on my guys list. I got criticism for having in my top 10 safeties and leaving James Wiggins off of it. I said that Derek Forrest is a better player than James Wiggins, much better coverage ability, and he ends up going 2 rounds ahead of James Wiggins to a team that has a great eye for this position. But look, Derek Forrest is a good starter in the NFL at this point after what he accomplished last year, making plays on balls, coming downhill as a tackler, just like he did it on Cincinnati tape. James Wiggins, I think, is like on Green Bay's practice squad after not making the Cardinals team and was drafted after Derek Forrest. So I'm proud of that draft take. It's been really fun to see one of my guys not just carve out a nice role, but be a legit starter in the NFL. And I think he's working his way up to a good contract extension. One of the more underrated players around the league right now, who you got to know who Derek Forrest is, because this guy's a playmaker, man. And he's got upside to continue climbing. But you can't rank him too high either, because it was a 1-year breakout type of deal. As far as your safety depth goes, you have Jeremy Reeves, who's a Pro Bowler because of how good he is on special teams. Really physical player when he does get in there, of course, as well. But a more limited athlete as far as the coverage range and consistency goes. Percy Butler, a little bit of the opposite. A young speedster out of I want to say Lafayette. Could be wrong about that, but yeah, still learning, developmental safety type. Terrell Burgess as well. They pick him up from the Rams. Was hyped up once upon a time, but his availability has been a concern. So very deep secondary. No superstars necessarily to give you that elite down-to-down consistency, but a group I like and certainly has upside if this team is going to exceed the 28th overall ranking. And as we look at the defense as a whole, if this defense is going to get into the top 10, as I rank them 15th right now because of all these questions, it's going to be A, Chase Young takes that step up, and B, some of these young players in the secondary land on the right side of the coin, basically, and things go well. And if that happens, if Emmanuel Forbes is a star in year one, if the nickel problem is answered, or the nickel question rather is answered, and then Chase Young, goes back to feeling like a alpha dog type of rusher, and maybe Jamin Davis takes a step up, dude, there is unbelievable potential for this to be like the best defense in the NFL. But there is a lot of youth there. It is unlikely that all of those things go right, but the thought of it is certainly exciting. So right now they rank 14th in pass defense and 15th in run defense. Very respectable. And because you have the foundation of that defensive line, that's probably their floor. But that's kind of how these things work, is we're trying not to give biased benefit of the doubt to any one given team, and this team undoubtedly has question marks that need to be answered. So that's ultimately how you arrive at this being the 28th ranked team, of course being spearheaded by the fact that they have massive quarterback and offensive line question marks, but they do have a notably great special teams, by the way, with Joey Sly and Tress Way, one of the better kicker-punter combos. We alluded to coverage player such as Jeremy Reeves, who made the Pro Bowl for his efforts. A well-coached, kind of disciplined, old-school thinking team that values special teams. So very much a strength of this team is going to be those special teams. Definitely one of the more boom or bust teams, and it's going to be exciting. You got Riverboat Ron, who's not actually that big of a risk taker or anything like that at this point, but still a fun nickname. In his last year, potentially, well, I don't want to word it like that, but in a make or break year for Ron Rivera, he knows it. And so many young players that could hit here and really make this NFC East even better. But that's an optimistic outlook, right? Sam Howell could suck. The offensive line could be different every week, and this team can't move the ball. Chase Young maybe can't stay healthy, and these young defensive backs struggle, and this is still a good defense, but not a great defense. And then you're just all right, well, we're just a team, right? So a lot of range of outcomes. Super excited to see how those outcomes turn out. Also excited for Eric Bieniemy, man. Good for him. But let's wrap things up by taking a look at this team's schedule and their Vegas over-under on the season. You start with Arizona. Probably no Kyler Murray in that game. You should be starting 1-0. After that, holy hell, this thing gets hard. You got to go to Denver, and Denver's I can't remember what happened last year, but they are historically good at home in September. It's insane. You have to give an extra 10% chance to Denver to win in the month of September. But then you got Buffalo at Philly. That's a tough start, man. At best, you're looking at 2-2. You do get Chicago at home. Very winnable for them, but Chicago is going to rank higher than Washington here. You got to deal with Justin Fields. You got to go to Atlanta. That won't be easy, although they do match up favorably against that wide zone run game. At the New York Giants, Philadelphia, at New England, at Seattle, Giants coming to town, at Dallas, Miami. That's a crazy hard run. They're going to be underdogs in every single one of those games. At the Rams, I'd much rather play the Rams earlier in the year than later in the year, but it is winnable for them. At the Jets, San Francisco, and Dallas for your last three games. That is a gauntlet, man. To have to play the NFC East, the AFC East with the Jets, the Dolphins, the Bills, and the Patriots, that's just hard, man. And of course, there's two good teams in the NFC West. Seattle happens to have the best home field advantage in football. And you got to go to Seattle instead of getting to host them. So it's it's going to be a gauntlet for this team. Even if a lot of things go right, it might not show up in the win column for them this year. And then you're going to have to make a tough decision on Ron Rivera's status and Eric Bieniemy and all that. So still a lot of work ahead for this Commanders team to do, but it was an exciting offseason. I am overall just optimistic for the ownership change. And there is a lot of youth here. Like, even if it doesn't happen this year, I think they're heading in the right direction. The front office, honestly, has always been pretty good quietly in Washington. They got to get that quarterback situation solved, but I do think overall the Commanders are in better hands, and that's some optimism. I know you ranked 28th, and I'm not projecting the best season for Washington necessarily, and there might be some Commanders fans that are upset with that, but I don't know. I think this is a realistic outlook for this team is some lumps here, but going to be one of the more fascinating, polarizing teams to watch, to say the least. So I really hope you guys did enjoy the deep dive. Again, if you're still here and you haven't hit that like button, I would really appreciate it. It does really help out. Do make sure you drop in comments down below as well. The YouTube algorithm likes that, and I like to interact with you guys. So let me know what you think of the ranking. If you think I missed on any analysis, if you're enjoying the series, let me know. I really appreciate you guys for watching. We'll see you for the next one. Peace out.